I think there's resistance to the big, beautiful bill growing, but because there is so much in this bill, it's really hard to say, oh, this is just the fiscal conservatives who are unhappy. For example, provisions on AI and what AI can do. You had Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Trump loyalist, say, just this week, if she'd read the bill, she might not have voted for it.
Well, it was always going to happen, and the fallout between Elon Musk and Donald Trump has begun. Musk, who's given up trying to cut federal spending, has now turned on the president's big, beautiful bill. That rolls over tax cuts and adds some more, and it increases defense spending. He's attacked it as, quote, an abomination, massive, outrageous, pork-filled. I just can't stand it anymore, he added. He didn't mention it also cancels a lot of green pork, also known as green subsidies, that have benefited Musk's green ventures. Musk is right, however, in pointing out that the bill will add trillions to America's already multi-trillion national debt, as well as keeping annual budget deficits at 7% for the foreseeable future. Let's speak to Katy Balls, Washington editor of The Times and Sunday Times. Katy, let's start with the tariffs. Does anybody in Washington have a clue where Britain will end up over steel tariffs?
Not exactly. I think first off, Britain is not top of the minds of many in Washington here.
Indeed.
Of course, you have had a situation whereby the White House have given the UK semi-special treatment because the UK-US deal has not yet been enacted. The UK is being spared the worst of this for 5 weeks while details are worked out. But there's certainly a question as to, which I know is making some in Westminster nervous, as to why is it taking so long to get this deal in action in the first place. And we did have a sense of that in that US-UK press conference in the Oval Office, where you had Peter Mandelson stood behind Donald Trump. And Peter Mandelson was saying, well, this is just the beginning of a process. Donald Trump was really talking up the idea it was a done deal. And it does feel right now that the done deal is not very done.
It certainly does feel like that. And I perfectly take the point that this is not an issue high up the agendas of Washington. It's got much bigger fish to fry. But it mattered in one sense, perhaps, Katy, to the Americans, and that is that the administration's been saying, yeah, we're putting up tariffs, but we've got people who want to do deals. We'll do deals that reduce tariffs. And basically the only kind of deal that they've done so far is with Britain. So if that was to fall apart, they'd look pretty stupid.
Yes, that is the case. And I think ultimately they've been talking about the number of deals they were going to do. Depending on what time of day you speak to Donald Trump in an interview, he might say the deals are done.
Yes.
But as you say, a very few and far between. And there was a reason when you go back to the Keir Starmer Donald Trump press conference that both had a real big motivation to amp up what had been decided. Keir Starmer having a difficult time following the local elections, but Donald Trump particularly feeling the market pushback,
Yes.
having many of his voter coalition, perhaps not the MAGA hardcore base yet, but certainly some of his business backers and others saying this tariff policy has gone too far. You need to bring calm to things. And the deal was meant to show that actually there's a strategy here, which means that the US economy is going to be in great shape and come out stronger. So if this falls apart, it is a problem for Donald Trump in terms of having those other conversations, particularly because there's already another big question mark, a bigger one, I think, over the tariff policy, which is the court ruling last week, which found that some of the tariffs that Donald Trump has brought in could be invalid because they are not fitting with the Constitution on executive power. And if that is the case, and while they're staying in place temporarily while the White House appeal it, then how do you do any of these negotiations? So you could say, I think, that time is of the essence for the White House to get these things going and get these things signed.
This will end up in the Supreme Court, won't it?
Yes, like many things, I think, involving the Trump administration agenda, we expect this to likely go to the Supreme Court. But this is now a common theme where you look at immigration, if you look at what's happening on education, Harvard, the way that Donald Trump has chosen to go about pushing through his agenda, using Congress a lot less than previous presidents have, does mean that there are now lots of legal wrangles going and question marks about how much is really going to be in place in a year's time.
The problem for the Trump administration is if it's now going to wend its way through the courts and end up in the Supreme Court, is that the uncertainty prevails all through the summer and into the autumn. And uncertainty means business doesn't invest and consumers don't spend. And the US economy, which slowed down in the first quarter, runs the risk of slowing down even more as the year wends its way.
Yes, and I recently interviewed Oren Cass, who's the head of American Compass, who's been pushing these tariff ideas for a long time and is close to JD Vance and others. And he made the point that even if you still agree with the policy, the uncertainty and anything looking like chaotic is damaging to the aim of the policy. So I think even those who support tariffs are getting a little bit worried about where this is going to shake out. And when you look across, I think, the summer and these court battles, there is a question as to what does Donald Trump do if these don't go his way? There's certainly a frustration, I think, towards some of Donald Trump's advisors as to whether the president had bad advice. Of course, the president makes his own decisions, but when it was Lighthizer advising on trade in the first term, they did not use these emergency powers to do it. They went about different ways and they are more long lasting, and that avoided some of the issues we're seeing now.
And of course, the steel tariffs aren't done under the emergency powers, so that's another complication that we have to take into account. But meanwhile, Mr. Musk is speaking up against the budget deficits that the big, beautiful tax cut bill is going to provide. Budget deficits as far as the eye can see. But it doesn't seem to me, Katy, that there are that many fiscal conservatives in Washington these days. I mean, the resistance to the Trump bill, even as it adds trillions to the national debt, isn't huge, is it?
No, I think there's resistance to the big, beautiful bill growing, but because there is so much in this bill, it's really hard to say, oh, this is just the fiscal conservatives who are unhappy. For example, provisions on AI and what AI can do. You had Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Trump loyalist, say, just this week, if she'd read the bill, she might not have voted for it, which led the Democrats to suggest
Didn't Ken Clark say that about the Maastricht Treaty?
So we're back to what you might expect politicians to read what they're voting for, but perhaps a consistent trend. But certainly there are some fiscal conservatives who are worried, but no one really wants to speak out. So you have figures like Rand Paul. You now have Elon Musk talking about this.
Right.
But Elon Musk is clearly a divisive figure in DC. And I think that one of the things about this bill is they want to get it done. So ahead of midterms, they have a positive message. And a lot of Republicans are just thinking, well, this means I have something nice to say by the time of the midterms, and we'll worry a bit after about what it means for the long-term economy.
Right. Now, the bill, as I understand, it's now in the Senate, and the Republican majority is quite tight in the Senate. Is there a chance the Senate may make some big changes to it before passing it back to the House?
I think there's potential for it. I think one of the interesting things from the White House and speaking to figures on the Hill is Donald Trump is saying he loves his big, beautiful bill, but they're also saying they are in listening mode on a few issues. So I think there is going to be wrangling going on for some time to come to get us across the line with Mike Johnson and so forth. So I think changes are definitely possible. When it comes to how drastic those will be, I think the main bones of this bill is going to remain. And for those who are worried about what it's going to do in terms of lifting the debt ceiling and so forth, the fundamentals are unlikely to change. Yes. And I just add on Elon Musk. I mean, he is criticizing this bill, saying it is fiscally reckless and so forth. But there are some in the MAGA base, such as Steve Bannon, who will say, well, Elon Musk is actually the reckless one because he came in with his chainsaw, trying to be Malay, said he could do all these, $2 trillion of cuts, which meant lots of Republicans felt they didn't have to make tough decisions elsewhere. Effectively a bit of a Pied Piper. Now Doge has not come anywhere close to hitting those targets yet. Elon Musk is exiting, and that is meaning that difficult decisions are looming. It's just that no one is quite ready for them yet.
And of course, the bill gets rid of a lot of the subsidies for green projects, which Mr. Musk has benefited from. Katy, while we've got you a final question, exercising minds here in Europe, it's clear the Trump peace process is not going anywhere in Ukraine. But what we don't know is, what does Trump do next? Does he just walk away entirely and leave Ukraine, saying, I can't solve this, as J.D. Vance has indicated? Or does he say, all right, I gave Putin a chance, he didn't take it, let's double down, let's support Ukraine, and let's make sure that Putin doesn't think that Ukraine can just be a walkover. Do we have any idea which way the administration might go on this?
So I would say I can speak for the mood of those in Republican circles and some in the administration, which is I think every time Donald Trump talks about how he could just walk away, people believe it a little bit less. And I think that if you think that this is Donald Trump who feels wrong that he doesn't yet have a Nobel Peace Prize, I think that he'll be reluctant, whatever the motivations here, to completely abandon the conflict and the resolution, but certainly there's deep frustrations, and therefore could we see more hostile action towards Russia? Again, this is something Donald Trump would say, "Oh, I'm not happy with Putin," but he keeps, drawing back. But at some point, it will have to snap. But certainly, I think the White House administration, or at least Donald Trump, would be uncomfortable, even if they called it Biden's war, with this running on and on throughout his second term.
We shall see. Of course, he may be haunted by these pictures of Mr. Biden and the scuttle from Afghanistan, and that could be his Ukraine, could be his Afghanistan. We shall see. Katy Balls, Washington editor of The Times and The Sunday Times.